The sides of what appeared to be an ordinary freight train suddenly dropped open, revealing rows of 20mm and 40mm anti-aircraft guns aimed directly at Lieutenant Royce Deacon Priest's P-51 Mustang. In an instant, a harmless locomotive transformed into a deadly German flak trap. Before Priest could react, a burst of fire slammed into the formation. Major Bert Marshall's Mustang, flying just off Priest's wing, took the worst of it. A 40mm round smashed beneath the exhaust stack. Another tore through the radiator scoop, missing the fuel tank by inches. Black smoke and flame poured from the stricken aircraft as Marshall peeled away. His fighter already dying beneath him. Priest watched helplessly as his squadron commander, the man he admired more than anyone alive, fought to keep his crippled Mustang in the air. Marshall spotted a wheat field below and announced he was going to belly land. Priest assessed the terrain, the distance to German lines, the odds of escape. They were nearly zero. If Marshall survived the landing, capture was almost guaranteed. That was the moment. Priest made a choice that would define his life. Ignoring orders crackling through his headset, he vowed to go in after his commander. Whether it earned him a medal or a court-martial didn't matter. Bert Marshall was more than a superior officer, he was Priest's hero, and Priest refused to let him vanish into a German prison camp. With that decision, the impossible rescue began. Royce Deacon Priest never forgot the first time he saw Bert Marshall. Priest had been 12 years old, skinny, shy, convinced the world was full of people stronger and braver than he could ever be. And then Marshall walked onto the baseball field at the county fair. Tall, confident, a natural athlete with an easy grin and a presence that made everyone turn their head. He pitched that day fastballs so quick they snapped the air like rifle rounds, and he hit a home run so hard it cleared the oak trees behind the field. Priest wasn't the only kid staring with wide eyes, but he was the one who never stopped staring. Marshall didn't just win games. He won people. Adults nodded with approval. Kids whispered his name the way someone might talk about a comic book hero. And when the newspapers ran a short piece calling him the hometown phenomenon, Priest cut it out and hid it inside his school books. It wasn't admiration, it was worship. Years passed, and while Priest grew into a capable student and a decent athlete, Marshall became something else entirely. At the University of Oregon, he broke track records, starred on the football field, and was so gifted that a professional career seemed guaranteed. But Marshall wanted something bigger, something that mattered. When war swept across Europe, he enlisted in the Army Air Forces, telling a local reporter he wanted to fly for the people who can't fight for themselves. He meant every word. Training transformed Marshall from an athlete into a phenomenon. He mastered aerobatics faster than anyone in his class. He scored expert marks in gunnery. He flew his P-51 Mustang as if it were an extension of his own body, and the instructors began whispering that he would be an ace one day. They were wrong. He became one much sooner than they expected. By the time Priest joined Marshall's group, the legend was already known across the 8th Air Force. Marshall flew with unfailing calm, made impossible kills sound routine in his mission reports, and guided his squadron with a mixture of humor, discipline, and the kind of charisma that made men willingly follow him into hell. Priest, now a young lieutenant, found himself assigned under the very man whose newspaper clipping he still carried in his footlocker. But in the air, Marshall didn't treat him like a worshiper or a kid from back home. He treated him like a pilot, a teammate, and eventually a friend. He corrected Priest's mistakes gently, encouraged him relentlessly, and after one particularly rough mission, Marshall clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You fly with guts, Royce. Keep doing that, and you'll do just fine." Those words stayed with Priest longer than any medal he would ever earn. So, when the war intensified and missions grew deadlier, Priest found himself shadowing Marshall not because he was ordered to, but because he trusted him with his life. Every pilot in the squadron admired Marshall. But Priest? He saw him the way a younger brother sees the older brother who taught him how to stand tall, and that was why, on the day a German flak train erupted beneath them and blew Marshall's Mustang apart, something inside Priest broke. He wasn't watching just another Aircraft go down. He was watching the man who shaped his entire life plummet toward enemy territory. He knew what capture meant. He knew what German patrols did to downed pilots. And he knew without hesitation. No force on earth would stop him from going after. Marshal. Not orders. Not danger. Not the impossibility of it. Oh, Marshal wasn't just a commander, he was Priest's. Hero. And heroes, Priest believed, were worth saving even if it cost him everything. The moment Major Bert Marshall's Mustang dropped out of formation, Royce Priest felt the world tilt sideways. Marshall's voice was usually calm, even when the sky burned with flak bursts. But now it came through the radio strained and clipped, each word weighted with pain. Engines hit. Losing coolant. I can't keep her up. Priest glanced down. The belly of Marshall's Mustang was hemorrhaging smoke, a long black ribbon stretching behind him like a funeral banner. Steam jetted from the punctured radiator. The propeller still spun, but the engine's rhythm wavered, a mechanical death rattle. Priest wanted to dive after him immediately, but the air around them was still alive with gunfire. The disguised German flak train erupted again, shells streaking past like angry comets. Priest yanked his Mustang hard left, climbing to evade another burst. By the time he rolled back toward Marshall, the Major had dropped to treetop level, searching desperately for anything flat enough to land on. Priest could almost feel his commander's panic, quiet, controlled, but real. There, Marshall said finally. I'm putting her down in that wheat field. Priest saw it, a narrow strip of flattened gold, hemmed in by uneven ground and scattered trees. Landing a P-51, there was madness. But belly landing a burning P-51 was better than bailing out into a forest crawling with German patrols. Watch your angle, Bert, Priest said. Voice tight, he followed Marshall's descent, powerless to help. The Mustang hit the field hard, plowing through wheat in a shower of dirt and debris. The belly tank sheared off. The propeller bent backward with a violent metallic shriek. The aircraft slid, spun, and came to a grinding stop, nose tilted slightly upward. Silence. Double quote. Bert, do you read? Priest's voice cracked at static. Then a cough. I'm out. I'm okay. Priest exhaled, but the relief lasted seconds. From the west, a line of German trucks was already moving. Soldiers poured out, rifles and machine guns glinting in the afternoon sun. Marshall stood beside his wrecked Mustang, waving his arms, trying to signal he was unhurt. Priest felt sick. Marshall didn't realize how close the enemy was. Bert, the Krauts are coming, Priest snapped. You need to move. Marshall turned, saw the patrol, and began limping toward the nearest hedgerow. His landing gear had slammed hard on impact. One leg had buckled under the force. He was wounded, trapped, alone. Priest looked down at the tiny wheat field. The uneven terrain, the trees, the German patrol. The smoke drifting from Marshall's wreck. Every part of his pilot's brain screamed, one thing, don't do it. Landing a P-51 in that field was suicide. Even if he survived the landing, taking off again would be nearly impossible. A single-seat fighter wasn't built to carry two grown men, especially not over enemy territory with limited fuel and approaching German forces, but none of that mattered, not. Today, not with Marshall limping through a field like a wounded animal while German soldiers closed in behind him. Over the radio, the squadron commander shouted, Priest, stay with the formation. That's an order. Priest didn't reply. He throttled back, dropped altitude, and dove toward the wheat field. He knew what defying a direct order meant. He knew what sacrificing a Mustang meant. He knew what landing behind enemy lines meant, but he also knew something far more important. Marshall had never once abandoned his men, and Priest refused to be the first man to abandon him. He leveled his wings, aimed for the narrow stretch of gold, and whispered to himself, Hang on. Bert, I'm coming. Then Priest committed fully to the rescue, the choice that would make or break both of their lives. Royce Priest had landed gliders before silent aircraft with massive wings and forgiving stalls, but a P-51 Mustang was no glider? It was a warhorse, fast, unforgiving, and notoriously temperamental at low speeds. It wanted long runways, not cramped fields hemmed in by trees and pocked with uneven soil, but today, the Mustang would obey him. It had to. Priest dropped flaps, cut his speed, and felt the familiar shudder as the aircraft fought to stay airborne on the edge of a stall. The wheat field rushed toward him, a patchwork of gold and shadows that looked much smaller from this angle. His heart hammered. Every instinct screamed that this was a mistake. A burst of machine gun fire cut across his left wing, stitching holes through the metal like angry hornets. The German patrol had spotted him. Priest forced his eyes back to the landing zone. A Mustang couldn't take damage like a bomber. One lucky shot to the coolant system and it was over. He angled his descent, jaw clenched, ignoring the fresh line of tracer fire racing past his canopy. "Come on! Come on," he muttered to the aircraft. "Hold together." He skimmed over the tree line so low the wingtips nearly brushed the branches. Then the wheat swallowed him. His wheels weren't down landing gear on a belly landing, would only rip off and flip the plane so the Mustang slid on its reinforced underbelly. Metal grinding violently against the earth, the impact slammed Priest forward against his harness, knocking the air from his lungs. The aircraft plowed into the soil, sending up a storm of dirt. The propeller shrieked as it struck earth, bending with a tortured metallic howl. The noise was deafening, the sound of a fighter dying, but it held together. The Mustang lurched, slowed, and finally stopped in a jagged skid of torn wheat and smoking earth. Priest exhaled sharply, lungs burning. His hands shook. His vision swam. Then he heard the shouts. German voices. They were close. Too close. Priest unlatched his canopy and threw it back, just as a burst of rifle fire cracked overhead. Bullets zipped through the wheat around him, slicing stalks in half. He ducked instinctively. "Bert, where are you?" A faint voice answered from the hedgerow. "Here, I'm hit. I can't move fast." Priest sprinted toward him, weaving through the wheat as bullets snapped past. He reached Marshall, who was leaning against a tree, his face pale and his leg trembling violently. Where the metal brace had locked up from the crash landing, Marshall managed a weak grin. "You idiot. You actually landed." Priest grabbed Marshall under the arm. "Save your insults for later." Together they half-limped, half-hopped back toward the Mustang, Priest doing most of the lifting. Marshall's weight slowed them. The Germans were shouting louder now, closing in. A sudden roar split the air. Priest looked up. 3 Mustangs, his squadron dived toward the field, guns blazing. The German patrol scattered in panic as dirt erupted around them under a hail of .50 caliber rounds. "Good boys," Priest whispered. The strafing run bought them seconds, precious seconds, but not much more. As soon as the wingmen pulled up, the Germans regrouped behind the tree line. Priest shoved Marshall toward the cockpit. "Get in." Marshall blinked. "There's one seat." "I know," Priest snapped. "We'll improvise." They shoved Marshall into the cramped space behind the pilot's seat, a space never meant for a human body. Marshall grimaced in pain but forced himself into position. Priest sprinted around the nose, grabbed the tail, and hauled the aircraft around by hamstraining every muscle until it pointed toward the only gap long enough for takeoff. More German shouts. More gunfire. Priest scrambled into the pilot's seat, slammed the canopy shut, and hit the starter. The engine coughed, shuddered. Come on, come on." Another volley of bullets cracked against the fuselage. The engine roared to life. Priest shoved the throttle forward. The aircraft lurched, bumped across the makeshift field. Picking up speed, but not fast enough, trees loomed ahead. Priest gritted his teeth and pushed the throttle to its limit. The Mustang screamed in protest. Somewhere behind him, Marshall groaned. Bracing himself, the trees rushed closer. Priest pulled back on the stick. The plane lifted, but only just. The wheels clipped the treetops, slicing branches, showering the canopy with leaves, but they were airborne. Barely. Alive. Major Bert Marshall ran toward the Mustang as fast as his battered body would allow, each step sending a spike of pain through his ribs. Smoke still drifted from the wreckage of his own aircraft behind him, and German voices echoed faintly beyond the trees. There was no time to think, no time to argue, and certainly no time to wait for orders. The P-51 sat ahead of them, engine idling, canopy open sleek, lethal, and completely unprepared for what Priest was about to ask of it. "There's only one seat," Marshall said. Breathless, stating the obvious. "I know," Priest replied, already climbing onto the wing. "Get in anyway." They had seconds. Maybe less. Marshall hesitated only long enough to understand that Priest wasn't joking. Then he hauled himself into the cockpit, twisting his body sideways to fit. The space was brutally tight. His knees pressed up against the instrument panel. His shoulders jammed beneath the canopy rails. There was no room to sit properly, no way to brace himself. Priest followed, squeezing in behind him, wedging his body into whatever empty space remained. He stood half-crouched, one foot on either side of the seat, his chest pressed against Marshall's back. The gun sight dug painfully into Priest's forehead. He couldn't see the instruments. He couldn't see the runway or what passed for one. He could barely breathe. The canopy wouldn't close. But there was no time to worry about that. Priest slammed it down as far as it would go and shoved the throttle forward. The Merlin engine answered with a furious roar. The Mustang surged ahead, wheels jolting violently as they bounced across uneven ground. Wheat stalks whipped against the fuselage. Dirt and stones hammered the underside of the aircraft. The acceleration was sluggish, too sluggish. The fighter was overloaded, wounded, and trying to do something it had never been designed to do. Trees rushed toward them like a solid wall of green. Priest had no forward visibility at all. Marshall's body blocked everything except a sliver of sky above the nose. There was no airspeed indicator he could see, no altitude gauge, no reference point of any kind. He flew by instinct alone. "Faster," Marshall muttered, gripping the cockpit edge. "I know," Priest snapped. The Mustang rattled, struggling to gain speed. The end of the field was coming up fast. Too fast. Priest felt the aircraft's hesitation in his bones. They were too heavy. The engine strained. The wheels pounded harder with every bounce. "This isn't going to work." Priest pulled back on the stick. Anyway, for a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the nose lifted. The wheels skimmed the tops of the wheat. The trees filled the windscreen. Priest hauled back harder, every muscle screaming in protest. Branches exploded past the canopy. Leaves tore away in a green blur. Something cracked against the fuselage metal, scraping wood, but the Mustang clawed upward, clearing the treetops by inches. They were airborne. Priest didn't let himself breathe because he knew the truth. Getting into the air had been the easy part. Surviving the flight home would be something else entirely. The P-51 Mustang was never meant to fly like this, with two men crammed into a single-seat cockpit, damaged control surfaces, and a ruptured cooling system. The aircraft felt wrong in the air, heavy, sluggish, and unpredictable. Every correction Priest made lagged behind his input, as if the Mustang were thinking twice before obeying. It wanted to roll, to sink, to give up. Worst of all, the engine was dying, the coolant leak was severe, and there was no hiding it. The temperature climbed relentlessly, needles sweeping upward into the danger zone. Heat radiated through the cockpit floor, seeping into Priest's boots, crawling up his legs. The Merlin engine's smooth roar had turned harsh and uneven. Each vibration a warning that metal inside was expanding beyond tolerance. Every minute aloft was borrowed time. Priest eased the throttle back, then nudged it forward again, hunting for a narrow balance, enough power to stay airborne, not enough to tear the engine apart. Marshall called out the temperatures, his voice calm but tight, still climbing. "Slow it down just a touch." Priest complied, feeling the Mustang settle lower as speed bled away. They were flying on a knife's edge now. Too much power, and the engine would seize. Too little, and they would drop into the water long before reaching land. Ahead, the English Channel stretched wide and merciless. Gray water reflected a dull sky, offering no forgiveness. Priest stared at it through the canopy, knowing that if the engine quit out here, survival would be uncertain at best. They pressed on. The aircraft vibrated harder now. the engine protesting every second of flight. Priest imagined coolant boiling away, pistons expanding, bearings scraping themselves raw. The Mustang was slowly cooking itself from the inside out. Then the coastline appeared, France slipped behind them, and the chalky outline of England rose ahead like a promise and a threat. They had crossed enemy territory, but the danger was far from over. The engine temperature was redlining now, flirting with catastrophic failure. Marshall's voice sharpened. "She's not going to last much longer." Priest nodded, even though Marshall couldn't see it. He reduced power again, trading altitude for mercy, letting the Mustang descend in a shallow glide. The engine tone changed, subtle but unmistakable. A roughness crept into the sound, the kind every pilot feared. The Mustang was dying. They were over the channel with a failing engine, 2 men aboard, and nowhere left to turn. All they could do now was pray the engine would hold together just a few minutes longer. The Mustang shuddered as its wheels met English soil. It wasn't a graceful landing. With 2 men aboard, a damaged airframe, and an engine on the brink of self-destruction, the aircraft came in fast and heavy. Priest flared late, fighting the stick as the landing gear slammed against the ground and bounced hard. The second impact was worse, the suspension groaning under a weight it was never meant to carry, for a heartbeat. It felt like the aircraft might tear itself apart. Then the Merlin engine made a sound Priest would never forget, a deep, grinding metallic groan as if the machine itself were exhaling its final breath. The vibration stopped. The roar vanished. Silence rushed in, broken only by the rattle of loose panels and the hiss of escaping steam. They had made it. Barely. Priest wrestled the Mustang down the makeshift runway, brakes juddering as the aircraft rolled through uneven ground. Every bump threatened to collapse the landing gear or send them skidding sideways. But the fighter slowed, shuddered once more, and finally came to rest. Behind them, flames erupted. The superheated engine compartment ignited in a violent burst as leaking oil and coolant flashed into fire. Thick black smoke curled into the sky, marking the end of the Mustang's fight. "Out now!" Priest shouted. Marshall threw the canopy release. It jammed for a terrifying second before popping free. Both men scrambled out, half falling onto the wing, boots slipping on scorched metal. They jumped to the ground and ran, coughing, heat licking at their backs as the flames spread forward along the fuselage. Priest stumbled, adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion. But Marshall caught him by the sleeve and hauled him clear. They collapsed onto the grass several yards away, gasping, staring back at the burning aircraft that had carried them across enemy territory and water alike. Moments later, British ground crew burst from a nearby hangar, dragging fire extinguishers, shouting orders. They slowed when they reached the scene, confusion replacing urgency. One of the sergeants stopped dead. He looked at the smoldering Mustang, then at the 2 American pilots standing beside it, then back at the cockpit. "Sir," he said carefully, "there's 2 of you." Priest and Marshall stared at each other. For a second, neither spoke. Then the absurdity of it all hit them at once, the impossible landing behind enemy lines, the overloaded takeoff, the dying engine over the channel, the fact that they were standing here at all. Marshall laughed first, a short, breathless bark that turned into something louder and uncontrollable. Priest followed, bending over, hands on his knees, laughter tearing out of him as weeks of fear, tension, and disbelief finally escaped. They had done it. They had landed where no fighter should land. They had flown what should never have flown. They had broken every rule that mattered and lived for the ground crew. It was a mystery. For Priest and Marshall, it was simple. They had survived the impossible. If this story moved you, make sure to like the video and subscribe to WW2 Rewind. We bring you the real moments of courage, sacrifice, and impossible survival, one true story at a time. Your support keeps these stories alive.